Introduction.
Definition of metaphysical poetry.
Metaphysical poetry is a term coined to describe a style of poetry that emerged in the early 17th century. It is characterized by its intricate metaphors, philosophical themes, and an overall intellectual tone. The term metaphysical itself suggests an exploration beyond the physical, delving into abstract concepts and the fundamental nature of reality. Metaphysical poets often employed wit, paradox, and a conversational style to engage readers in their contemplative and often provocative verse.
Historical context and origin.
Metaphysical poetry originated during a time of significant change and upheaval in England. The early 1600s were marked by political unrest, religious conflict, and scientific discovery. This period saw the end of the Elizabethan era and the beginning of the Stuart period, culminating in the English Civil War. The term metaphysical poets was first used by Samuel Johnson in the 18th century, who referred to the unique style of poets like John Donne and George Herbert.
Key themes and motifs.
Key themes in metaphysical poetry include love, religion, death, and the nature of the soul. These poets often juxtapose the spiritual with the physical, the eternal with the temporal, and the intellectual with the emotional. Their works are notable for their exploration of complex ideas and their use of elaborate metaphors known as conceits.
Importance in literature.
Metaphysical poetry holds a significant place in English literature for its innovation and depth. It challenged contemporary poetic norms and influenced subsequent literary movements. The intellectual rigor and emotional intensity of metaphysical poetry have inspired poets across generations, making it a pivotal subject of study in literary history.
Major metaphysical poets. John Donne.
John Donne is often regarded as the master of metaphysical poetry. His works encompass a wide range of subjects, from romantic love to religious devotion. Donne's poetry is known for its profound metaphysical conceits and his ability to blend intellectual inquiry with passionate expression. Some of his most famous poems include A Valediction Forbidding Mourning and The Flea.
George Herbert.
George Herbert's poetry reflects his deep religious faith and his role as a clergyman. His collection, The Temple, contains some of the most cherished poems in the English language, including The Collar and Easter Wings. Herbert's work is characterized by its devotional fervor and the use of intricate formal structures.
Andrew Marvell.
Andrew Marvell is another key figure in metaphysical poetry, known for his political satires and lyrical verse. His poem To His Coy Mistress is one of the most famous metaphysical poems, combining elements of carpe diem with elaborate metaphysical conceits. Marvell's work often explores themes of love, politics, and the natural world.
Henry Vaughan.
Henry Vaughan's poetry is deeply influenced by his religious beliefs and the natural beauty of his Welsh homeland. His collection, Silex Scintillans, The Flashing Flint, includes meditative and mystical poems such as The World and The Retreat. Vaughan's work is noted for its introspective tone and spiritual depth.
Richard Crashaw.
Richard Crashaw was a Roman Catholic convert whose poetry is marked by its intense spiritual fervor and vivid imagery. His works, such as The Weeper and Hymn to Saint Teresa, reflect his religious devotion and his penchant for Baroque extravagance. Crashaw's poetry often explores themes of divine love and mystical experience.
Characteristics of metaphysical poetry.
Use of conceits.
One of the hallmarks of metaphysical poetry is the use of conceits, extended metaphors that draw striking and often complex comparisons between seemingly unrelated things. These conceits serve to illuminate the poet's themes in unexpected ways and challenge the reader's perceptions.
Intellectual playfulness.
Metaphysical poets are known for their intellectual playfulness, engaging readers with witty wordplay, paradoxes, and clever arguments. This intellectual approach sets metaphysical poetry apart from the more straightforward emotional expressions of other poetic traditions.
Philosophical exploration.
Philosophical exploration is central to metaphysical poetry. These poets grapple with profound questions about existence, the nature of the soul, and the relationship between the physical and the spiritual. Their work often reflects the intellectual currents of their time, including advancements in science and shifts in religious thought.
Blend of emotion and reason.
Metaphysical poetry is unique in its ability to blend emotion and reason. Poets like Donne and Herbert seamlessly integrate passionate expression with intellectual rigor, creating a rich tapestry of thought and feeling. This duality is one of the defining features of metaphysical poetry.
Use of paradox and irony.
Paradox and irony are frequently employed in metaphysical poetry to challenge readers and provoke deeper reflection. These devices highlight the complexity and contradictions inherent in human experience and the poet's themes.
Colloquial diction and syntax.
Despite their intellectual content, metaphysical poets often used colloquial diction and syntax, making their work accessible and engaging. This conversational style allows them to connect more directly with their audience, drawing readers into their contemplative explorations.
Themes in metaphysical poetry.
Love and romance.
Love is a central theme in metaphysical poetry, often explored in its various forms: physical, spiritual, and intellectual. Poems like Donne's The Sun Rising and Marvell's To His Coy Mistress delve into the complexities of romantic relationships, blending sensual imagery with philosophical inquiry.
Death and mortality.
Death and mortality are recurring themes in metaphysical poetry, reflecting the poet's preoccupation with the transient nature of life. Donne's Death Be Not Proud and Vaughan's The Retreat are poignant meditations on the inevitability of death and the hope for an afterlife.
Nature of the soul.
The nature of the soul is another key theme in metaphysical poetry. Poets like Donne and Herbert often explore the soul's relationship to the body, its immortality, and its connection to the divine. These explorations are marked by deep philosophical inquiry and spiritual introspection.
Conflict between body and soul.
The conflict between body and soul is a central concern in metaphysical poetry. This theme is often explored through the lens of religious devotion, love, and mortality. Poems like Donne's The Ecstasy and Herbert's The Pearl delve into this duality, highlighting the tension between physical desire and spiritual aspiration.
Literary techniques in metaphysical poetry. Metaphysical conceit.
The metaphysical conceit is a defining feature of this poetic tradition. It involves elaborate and often surprising comparisons that extend over the course of a poem. These conceits challenge readers to see connections between seemingly disparate elements, enriching the poem's thematic complexity.
Imagery and symbolism.
Imagery and symbolism are used extensively in metaphysical poetry to evoke vivid scenes and convey deeper meanings. Poets like Donne and Herbert employ rich sensory language and symbolic references to explore their themes, creating layers of meaning that invite close reading and interpretation.
Metaphor and simile.
Metaphors and similes are key tools in the metaphysical poet's arsenal, used to draw connections and illuminate abstract concepts. These figures of speech are often intricate and multifaceted, contributing to the poem's intellectual and emotional depth.
Irony and paradox.
Irony and paradox are employed to provoke thought and highlight the complexities of human experience. Metaphysical poets use these devices to challenge conventional wisdom and present new perspectives on their themes.
Allusion and reference.
Allusion and reference are common in metaphysical poetry, drawing on classical literature, religious texts, and contemporary thought. These allusions enrich the poem's meaning and connect the poet's ideas to a broader cultural and intellectual context.
Analysis of key works. John Donne's The Flea.
The Flea is one of John Donne's most famous poems, known for its playful and provocative conceit. In this poem, Donne uses the image of a flea, which has bitten both the speaker and his lover, to argue for their physical union. The flea becomes a symbol of their mingled blood and an extended metaphor for their relationship. The poem's clever argumentation and bold imagery exemplify Donne's metaphysical style.
George Herbert's The Collar.
The Collar is a powerful expression of George Herbert's inner turmoil and spiritual struggle. The poem follows the speaker's journey from rebellion against religious constraints to eventual submission to God's will. Herbert's use of vivid imagery and dramatic monologue captures the intensity of this internal conflict, reflecting his deep faith and emotional complexity.
Andrew Marvell's To His Coy Mistress.
To His Coy Mistress is a quintessential example of metaphysical poetry, blending carpe diem themes with intricate metaphysical conceits. Marvell's speaker urges his lover to seize the day and embrace their love before time runs out. The poem's persuasive argument, vivid imagery, and philosophical depth make it a masterpiece of the metaphysical tradition.
Henry Vaughan's The Retreat.
The Retreat is a reflective and deeply spiritual poem by Henry Vaughan. The speaker laments the loss of innocence and spiritual purity experienced in childhood, yearning for a return to this state of grace. Vaughan's use of pastoral imagery and contemplative tone underscores the poem's themes of nostalgia and spiritual longing.
Richard Crashaw's The Weeper.
The Weeper is an intensely emotional and visually rich poem by Richard Crashaw. Dedicated to St. Mary Magdalene, the poem celebrates her penitence and divine love. Crashaw's use of elaborate imagery and Baroque style creates a vivid portrayal of spiritual ecstasy and devotion, reflecting his Catholic faith and poetic sensibility.
Influence and Legacy. Impact on contemporary poetry.
Metaphysical poetry has had a lasting impact on contemporary poetry, influencing poets who seek to blend intellectual rigor with emotional expression. The innovative techniques and thematic depth of metaphysical poets continue to inspire modern writers, who often draw on their example to explore complex ideas in fresh and engaging ways.
Comparison with romantic poetry.
While metaphysical poetry is characterized by its intellectual and philosophical approach, romantic poetry emphasizes emotion, nature, and individualism. However, both traditions share a deep engagement with profound themes and a commitment to exploring the human experience. The contrast between these styles highlights the diversity and evolution of poetic expression over time.
Influence on modernist poets.
Modernist poets such as T.S. Eliot and Ezra Pound were influenced by the metaphysical poet's use of conceits, irony, and intellectual depth. Eliot's admiration for Donne and his contemporaries is evident in his own work, which often employs similar techniques to explore complex themes. The legacy of metaphysical poetry thus extends into the 20th century and beyond.
Critical reception over time.
Metaphysical poetry has experienced varying degrees of critical reception over time. Initially, poets like Donne were celebrated for their innovation, but their work later fell out of favor in the 18th century. The 20th century saw a revival of interest, with critics like T.S. Eliot and Helen Gardner championing their significance and exploring their contributions to the literary canon.
Metaphysical poetry and modern times. Relevance in contemporary literature.
Metaphysical poetry remains relevant in contemporary literature, offering a model for poets who seek to blend intellectual exploration with emotional depth. Its themes of love, mortality, and spirituality continue to resonate with modern readers, and its innovative techniques provide a rich source of inspiration for contemporary writers.
Modern interpretations.
Modern interpretations of metaphysical poetry often focus on its philosophical and existential dimensions. Contemporary scholars and poets explore how the metaphysical poet's engagement with complex ideas can inform current discussions on religion, science, and the human condition. These interpretations highlight the enduring relevance and adaptability of metaphysical poetry.
Adaptations in other media.
Metaphysical poetry has been adapted into various media, including theatre, film, and music. These adaptations often emphasize the dramatic and emotional intensity of the poems, bringing their themes and imagery to new audiences. Such adaptations demonstrate the versatility and timeless appeal of metaphysical poetry.
Comparative studies. Metaphysical poetry versus cavalier poetry.
Metaphysical poetry and cavalier poetry emerged during the same period, but represent different stylistic and thematic approaches. While metaphysical poetry is characterized by its intellectual rigor and complex conceits, cavalier poetry is known for its elegance, wit, and emphasis on courtly love. A comparative study highlights the diverse literary landscape of the 17th century and the distinct contributions of each tradition.
Metaphysical poetry versus Renaissance poetry.
Metaphysical poetry differs from earlier Renaissance poetry in its focus on philosophical inquiry and its use of intricate metaphors. Renaissance poetry often celebrates beauty, nature, and human achievement, while metaphysical poetry delves into abstract and spiritual themes. This comparison underscores the evolution of poetic expression from the Renaissance to the metaphysical period.
Metaphysical poetry versus Victorian poetry.
Victorian poetry, emerging in the 19th century, often addresses social issues, personal identity, and the challenges of modernity. In contrast, metaphysical poetry focuses on existential and philosophical questions. Despite these differences, both traditions share a commitment to exploring profound themes and pushing the boundaries of poetic form.
Academic perspectives. Scholarly analysis.
Scholarly analysis of metaphysical poetry often focuses on its use of conceits, its philosophical themes, and its historical context. Researchers examine how metaphysical poets engage with contemporary intellectual currents and how their work reflects broader cultural and religious shifts. Such analysis provides a deeper understanding of the complexity and significance of metaphysical poetry.
Key criticisms.
Critics of metaphysical poetry have sometimes argued that its intellectual complexity can obscure emotional expression and alienate readers. Others have criticized the often elaborate and obscure nature of metaphysical conceits. Despite these criticisms, many scholars and readers appreciate the depth and innovation of metaphysical poetry.
Major theoretical approaches.
Major theoretical approaches to metaphysical poetry include formalist analysis, which examines the structure and style of the poems, and historical approaches, which situate the work within its cultural and intellectual context. Psychoanalytic and feminist readings also offer insights into the emotional and gender dynamics present in metaphysical poetry.
Teaching metaphysical poetry. Approaches in education.
Teaching metaphysical poetry often involves a focus on its literary techniques, themes, and historical context. Educators may use close reading and analytical exercises to help students appreciate the complexity and innovation of metaphysical poems. Comparative studies with other poetic traditions can also enrich students' understanding.
Challenges in teaching.
One of the challenges in teaching metaphysical poetry is its intellectual and linguistic complexity, which can be daunting for students. Educators must find ways to make the poems accessible and engaging, helping students to connect with the themes and appreciate the poet's craftsmanship.
Resources for educators.
Resources for teaching metaphysical poetry include anthologies, critical essays, and multimedia materials. Annotated editions of key works can provide valuable context and analysis, while online resources and scholarly databases offer a wealth of information for deeper study. Engaging with contemporary interpretations and adaptations can also enhance the learning experience.
Conclusion. Summary of metaphysical poetry's essence.
Metaphysical poetry is a rich and complex tradition that blends intellectual rigor with emotional depth. Its use of intricate conceits, philosophical themes, and innovative techniques sets it apart as a unique and influential genre in English literature.
Enduring appeal.
The enduring appeal of metaphysical poetry lies in its ability to engage with profound questions about love, faith, mortality, and the nature of existence. Its intellectual playfulness and emotional intensity continue to resonate with readers and inspire poets across generations.
Future directions in study.
Future directions in the study of metaphysical poetry may include interdisciplinary approaches that connect the work of metaphysical poets with developments in science, philosophy, and theology. Digital humanities projects can also provide new insights through textual analysis and data visualization.
Final thoughts.
Metaphysical poetry remains a vital and dynamic field of study, offering rich material for exploration and reflection. Its blend of intellect and emotion, coupled with its innovative use of language and form, ensures its place as a cornerstone of English literary tradition